Juliana O'Sullivan's heart pounded in her chest as she raced through the golden prairie grass, the setting sun casting long shadows across the Kansas plains. Behind her, she could hear the distant shouts of the men who had run her out of town, their cruel laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Her once beautiful emerald green dress, the only fine thing she owned, caught on a cluster of thorny bushes as she fled, the sound of tearing fabric echoing in her ears like a gunshot. The year was 1874 and Juliana had just lost everything. Again. Stumbling to a halt near a small creek that cut through the rolling landscape, Juliana collapsed onto a flat rock and finally allowed herself to break down. Her trembling fingers traced the jagged tear that ran from the hem all the way up to her knee. The dress had been her mother's, the last tangible connection to the family she'd lost to fever 3 years prior. Now it was ruined, just like her reputation in yet another frontier town. "Worthless," she whispered, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged cheeks. "Everything I touch falls apart." So absorbed was she in her misery that Juliana didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats until they were nearly upon her. Startled, she looked up to see a tall figure on horseback silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Miss, you all right?" The man's voice was deep but gentle, carrying a slight southern drawl. Juliana hastily tried to wipe away her tears, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable state. "I'm fine," she lied, attempting to smooth down her ruined dress. "Just resting a moment." The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. As he stepped closer, Juliana could make out his features in the fading light, a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, kind eyes the color of warm whiskey, and a weathered Stetson pulled low over his brow. "No offense intended, madam, but you don't look fine to me." He kept a respectful distance but nodded toward her torn dress and tear-stained face. Juliana's hands instinctively moved to cover the tear. "It's nothing, just a silly dress." The stranger's eyes softened. "Doesn't seem silly to me if it's got you crying like that." Something about his gentle tone broke through Juliana's carefully constructed walls. Fresh tears welled in her eyes as she looked down at the ruined garment. "It was my mother's," she admitted quietly. "The only thing I had left of her." The cowboy removed his hat, revealing a shock of sandy brown hair. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that." He hesitated, then added with a sincerity that caught her off guard, "If it's worth anything, you look beautiful anyway." Juliana's head snapped up, ready to find mockery in his expression, but there was none, just an earnest kindness she hadn't encountered in a very long time. "Blake Hawkins," he said, offering his name with a slight tip of his hat. "I've got a ranch about 3 miles east of here." "Juliana O'Sullivan," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Blake glanced at the darkening sky. "It'll be full dark soon, Miss O'Sullivan. Not safe for a lady to be out here alone. My sister Martha lives at the ranch with me. I'd be happy to escort you there for the night if you've nowhere else to go." Juliana hesitated. Trust didn't come easily to her anymore, not after everything she'd been through. But the alternative was spending the night alone on the prairie, and the distant howl of a coyote made her decision for her. "Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. I would appreciate that." Blake offered his hand to help her up. "Just Blake is fine." As his warm, calloused hand enveloped hers, Juliana felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of safety. It was fleeting and fragile, but for the moment, it was enough. Blake led her to his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion with intelligent eyes. "This here's Copper," he said, patting the animal's neck affectionately. "He's strong enough to carry us both back to the ranch." With surprising gentleness for a man of his size, Blake helped Juliana onto the saddle before mounting behind her. She stiffened momentarily at the proximity, but the respectful way he held himself, barely touching her except where necessary to guide the horse, gradually put her at ease. As they rode across the darkening prairie, Juliana found herself wondering about the kind cowboy who had come to her rescue. In her experience, men rarely offered help without expecting something in return. Yet something told her Blake Hawkins was different. "If you don't mind my asking," Blake said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "What brings you out here all alone?" Juliana tensed. "It's a long story." "Well," he replied, "we've got a long ride ahead of us," she sighed, deciding to offer at least a partial truth. "I was working as a seamstress in Riverspend. There was a misunderstanding. I had to leave rather suddenly." Blake didn't press further, for which Juliana was grateful. "Riverspend, huh? Sheriff Holden still running things over there?" "Yes," Juliana answered, surprised. "Do you know him? Our paths have crossed." There was something in his tone that suggested the crossing hadn't been pleasant. "Not the most understanding man I've ever met." Juliana couldn't help but laugh, a short, bitter sound. "That's putting it mildly." As they crested a gentle hill, Blake pointed ahead. "There she is, Hawkins Ranch, not much to look at, but it's home." In the fading light, Juliana could make out a modest but well-maintained ranch house, a large barn, and several smaller outbuildings. A warm glow emanated from the windows, and even from a distance, it looked more inviting than anywhere Juliana had stayed in years. "It looks lovely," she said honestly. Blake guided Copper down the hill toward the ranch. "Martha will be happy to have another woman around, even if just for a night. Gets tired of just my company, I expect." As they approached the house, a slender woman with hair the same sandy shade as Blake's emerged onto the porch, a shotgun held casually at her side. When she recognized her brother, she lowered the weapon and tilted her head curiously at the sight of Juliana. "Blake Hawkins, you go out for supplies and come back with a lady. That's not what I meant when I said to bring back something nice from town." Despite her words, Martha's tone was warm and her smile welcoming. Blake dismounted and helped Juliana down. "Martha, this is Miss Juliana O'Sullivan. She had some trouble and needs a place to stay for the night. Miss O'Sullivan, my sister Martha." Martha set the shotgun aside and stepped forward, her sharp eyes taking in Juliana's disheveled appearance and torn dress with a single glance. But instead of the judgment Juliana expected, there was only concern in the woman's expression. "You poor thing. Come inside and get cleaned up. I've just made stew and there's plenty to go around." Before Juliana could protest, Martha had taken her arm and was guiding her toward the house. She glanced back at Blake, who gave her an encouraging nod as he began to unsaddle Copper. "Don't worry about him," Martha said, following Juliana's gaze. "My brother knows his way around that barn better than this house. He'll join us once he's settled Copper." The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and colorful quilts that added warmth to the space. Martha led Juliana to a small bedroom off the main living area. "This is my room, but you can use it tonight. I'll bunk with Blake." She pulled open a drawer and extracted a clean nightgown and a simple day dress. "These should fit you well enough. The wash basin is there with fresh water." Juliana was overwhelmed by the kindness. "I can't take your room and I couldn't possibly," Martha waved away her protests. "Nonsense. You're our guest. Now get cleaned up and changed. That dress can be mended, you know." Juliana looked down at her torn garment. "You think so? I know so. I'm handy with a needle, and if you were a seamstress in Riverspend, I'm guessing you are too." Martha smiled warmly. "We'll look at it tomorrow. For now, rest and eat." Left alone, Juliana slowly removed her ruined dress, carefully folding it despite its condition. She washed away the dirt and tears from her face and changed into Martha's borrowed nightgown, which was slightly large but clean and comfortable. When she emerged from the bedroom, the smell of beef stew made her stomach growl loudly. Blake had returned from the barn and was setting the table while Martha ladled stew into bowls. "Feel better?" Blake asked, his eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to his task. "Yes, thank you." Juliana hesitated in the doorway, suddenly feeling out of place in this cozy domestic scene. Martha gestured to a chair. "Sit, eat. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." It had actually been longer than that, but Juliana didn't say so. She sat at the table, and Blake took a seat across from her while Martha brought over the bowls of stew and a plate of fresh bread. Blessing Blake, Martha prompted, and the three of them bowed their heads as Blake offered a simple prayer of thanks. The stew was hearty and delicious, and Juliana had to force herself to eat slowly instead of devouring it like the starving woman she was. As they ate, Martha kept the conversation light, talking about the ranch and their small herd of cattle, the vegetable garden she tended, and the upcoming harvest festival in the nearby town of Willow Creek. "You should come with us," Martha said suddenly. "The festival's in 3 days. It would give you a chance to meet folks, maybe find work if you're looking to stay in the area." Juliana nearly choked on her stew. "Oh, I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition," Blake said quietly. "You're welcome to stay until you figure out your next steps." Juliana looked between the siblings, searching for any sign of ulterior motives and finding none. "Why are you both being so kind to me? You don't even know me." Martha and Blake exchanged a glance that seemed to hold an entire conversation. Finally, Martha spoke. "6 years ago, I was in a situation not unlike yours, running from something with nowhere to go. A kind family took me in until Blake could come get me. We're just passing along the kindness we've received." There was clearly more to the story, but Juliana didn't press. Everyone had their secrets and she had more than most. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll try not to be a burden." "You won't be," Blake assured her. "Martha's been wanting help with the harvest and I could use an extra hand with the mending. Ranch work is hard on clothes." "I would be happy to help with both," Juliana offered, relief washing over her at the thought of having a safe place to stay, even temporarily. After dinner, Martha insisted on cleaning up alone, shooing Blake and Juliana to the porch where they could enjoy the cool evening air. They sat in comfortable rocking chairs watching as stars appeared in the vast Kansas sky. "It's beautiful here," Juliana said softly. "Peaceful," Blake nodded. "That's why I bought this place after the war, needed somewhere quiet to think." "You fought in the war?" Juliana asked, curious about this man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. "Cavalry," he confirmed. "Confederate side, though I wasn't much for the politics of it, just a young fool who thought war might be an adventure." He shook his head. "Found out quick enough how wrong I was." Juliana understood all too well the disillusionment that came with youth's naive expectations. "War changes people, I suppose." "That it does." Blake looked at her thoughtfully. "What about you? What's your story, if you don't mind my asking?" Juliana tensed, her hands gripping the arms of the rocking chair. "I told you I was a seamstress in Riverspend. Before that," Blake said gently, "you don't get that look in your eyes just from sewing dresses." For a moment, Juliana considered inventing a story, something simple and unremarkable. But something about Blake's honest gaze made her want to offer at least a piece of the truth. "I grew up in Boston," she began. "My father was a professor at the university there. When he and my mother died of fever, I had no family left, no money for school. I worked as a governess for a while, but—" She trailed off, unwilling to reveal that particular chapter of her past. "I decided to head west, new opportunities and all that." Blake seemed to sense her reluctance to continue. "Must have been hard, leaving everything you knew behind." "It was," Juliana admitted, "but staying would have been harder." They fell silent for a while, the only sounds the gentle creaking of the rocking chairs and the chorus of night insects in the surrounding prairie. "That dress," Blake said eventually. "The one that tore, it looked like it was from back east, fine material." Juliana nodded. "My mother wore it to lectures and university functions. It was the only thing of hers I could bring with me." She sighed, remembering how beautiful her mother had looked in that emerald silk. "Foolish of me to wear it out here, I suppose." "Not foolish," Blake disagreed. "Some things you keep close because they matter, not because they're practical." His understanding touched her. "Yes, exactly." Martha joined them on the porch, carrying a tray with 3 cups of coffee. "Thought we could use something warm. Nights get chilly out here, even in summer." Juliana accepted the offered cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. "Thank you, Martha, for everything." Martha settled into the third rocking chair with a contented sigh. Been a while since we had company out here, it's nice." As they sipped their coffee under the star-filled sky, Juliana felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time, a sense of belonging. She knew it was temporary, that this peaceful moment couldn't last, but for now she would allow herself to enjoy it. Morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the curtains of Martha's bedroom. For a moment, Juliana was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back: her hasty departure from Riverspend, the tear in her beloved dress, and the kindness of the Hawkins siblings. The smell of coffee and bacon drew her from the bedroom. She quickly dressed in the simple blue calico that Martha had lent her, pinning up her long auburn hair as neatly as she could without her usual hairpins. In the kitchen, Martha stood at the stove, turning bacon in a cast-iron skillet. She glanced over her shoulder as Juliana entered and smiled warmly. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Juliana admitted. "Can I help with anything?" Martha pointed to a bowl of batter. "If you wouldn't mind making the flapjacks while I finish this bacon." "Blake's out tending to the animals, but he'll be hungry as a bear when he comes in." Juliana set to work, grateful to have something to do. By the time Blake entered through the back door, his shirt already showing signs of the morning's labor, a stack of golden flapjacks sat warming by the stove, and the table was set for breakfast. "Something smells mighty fine," Blake said, washing his hands at the basin by the door. His eyes met Juliana's briefly, and she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest at his appreciative glance. "Morning, Miss O'Sullivan. Please call me Juliana," she replied, surprising herself with the invitation to such familiarity. "After your kindness, formality seems unnecessary." Blake's smile reached his eyes. "Juliana it is, then." Breakfast was a lively affair, with Martha recounting local gossip and Blake describing his plans for the day's work. When Juliana offered to help, Blake initially demurred, suggesting she rest after her ordeal. "I'm stronger than I look," Juliana insisted, "and I've never been one for sitting idle." "She's got you there, brother," Martha laughed. "Let the woman work if she wants to. Heaven knows we could use the help." And so after breakfast, Juliana found herself in the barn, helping Blake sort through bags of seed for the winter wheat planting. It was simple work, but it gave her hands something to do while her mind processed all that had happened. "You said you were a seamstress in Riverspend," Blake commented as they worked. "You any good at it?" Juliana couldn't help but smile proudly. "Very good, actually. I apprenticed with a dressmaker in Boston before coming west. I can design and sew nearly anything, from everyday wear to wedding gowns." Blake nodded thoughtfully. "Willow Creek's been without a proper seamstress since old Mrs. Finch passed last winter. Folks have been sending away to Kansas City for their special clothes, or making do with what they have." Juliana paused in her sorting. "Are you suggesting I set up shop in Willow Creek?" "Just thinking aloud," Blake said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Town's growing, railroads coming through next year might be a good opportunity for someone with your skills." The idea was appealing, a fresh start in a place where no one knew her past. But Juliana had learned the hard way that starting over was never as simple as it seemed. "I'll think about it," she said noncommittally. They worked in companionable silence for a while longer until Martha appeared at the barn door, carrying Juliana's torn dress. "I've been looking at this," Martha said, carefully spreading the garment on a clean section of the workbench. "The tear's bad, but not irreparable. With the right silk thread, you'd hardly notice the mend." Juliana ran her fingers along the ragged edge of the tear. "I don't have any silk thread that matches. I left most of my sewing supplies behind, Mrs. Atwell at the general store in Willow Creek might have something suitable," Blake suggested. "I need to head into town this afternoon for supplies anyway. You ladies could come along if you like." Martha's eyes lit up. "A trip to town, now that's an offer I won't refuse." "Been nearly 2 weeks since I've seen a soul besides Blake." Juliana hesitated. Are you sure it's wise for me to go? Riverspend isn't that far from Willow Creek. Someone might recognize me. Blake's expression turned serious. Juliana, whatever happened in Riverspend, and you don't have to tell us if you don't want to, I'm guessing it wasn't your fault. Am I right? Juliana swallowed hard. Yes, but that doesn't always matter, does it? People believe what they want to believe. True enough, Blake acknowledged. But Willow Creek isn't Riverspend. Different folks, different attitudes, and you'd be with us. There was something reassuring about the way he said with us, as if she truly belonged with the Hawkins siblings, if only temporarily. All right, she agreed. I'll come. The ride to Willow Creek took just over an hour, with Juliana riding beside Martha in the wagon while Blake handled the team of horses. The town itself was smaller than Riverspend, but had a tidy, prosperous look to it, with well-maintained storefronts lining the main street and a pretty white church at one end. Blake pulled the wagon to a halt in front of the general store. I need to speak with the blacksmith about some repairs. Why don't you ladies see what Mrs. Atwell has in the way of sewing supplies? I'll meet you back here in an hour. As Blake strode off toward the smithy, Martha looped her arm through Juliana's. Come on. Mrs. Atwell is a terrible gossip but has the best selection of goods between here and Topeka. The bell above the door jingled as they entered the store. Behind the counter stood a plump woman in her 50s, her gray streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her shrewd eyes immediately focused on Juliana. Well now, Martha Hawkins, who's your friend, Mrs. Atwell asked, her voice friendly but her gaze assessing. This is Juliana O'Sullivan, Martha replied. She's staying with us for a while. Juliana, Mrs. Eliza Atwell, proprietor of Willow Creek's finest establishment. Mrs. Atwell preened slightly at the compliment. Pleasure to meet you, Miss O'Sullivan. New to these parts? Yes, Juliana answered simply, not offering more information. Juliana was a seamstress back east, Martha added, smoothly changing the subject. We're looking for some silk thread to mend a dress. Something in emerald green if you have it. Mrs. Atwell's eyes lit up at the mention of sewing. A seamstress, you say? Well now, that's interesting. We've been sorely lacking in that department since Mrs. Finch passed. While Mrs. Atwell searched through her inventory for the thread, a well-dressed woman entered the store. Juliana recognized the quality of her attire immediately. The burgundy walking suit was at least a season old by Eastern standards, but still finer than anything typically seen in these small Western towns. Mrs. Harrington, Mrs. Atwell greeted the newcomer effusively. What a pleasure to see you today. Mrs. Harrington, a handsome woman in her 40s with carefully coiffed blonde hair, nodded regally. I need some buttons for Victoria's dress, the blue ones if you have them, as Mrs. Atwell hurried to assist her new customer. Martha leaned closer to Juliana. Margaret Harrington, she whispered. Richest woman in the county. Her husband owns the bank and half the businesses in town. Juliana observed the woman with professional interest. Her clothing was expensive but poorly fitted, suggesting it had been ordered from a catalog rather than custom-made. Mrs. Harrington noticed Juliana's appraisal and raised an eyebrow. I don't believe we've met. Martha quickly performed introductions. Mrs. Harrington, this is Juliana O'Sullivan, a friend staying with us at the ranch. Juliana, Mrs. Margaret Harrington. Miss O'Sullivan is a seamstress from back east, Mrs. Atwell added helpfully, returning with a box of buttons. Mrs. Harrington's interest visibly sharpened. Is that so? And what brings you to our little corner of Kansas, Miss O'Sullivan? Juliana felt a moment of panic, but Martha smoothly intervened. Juliana is considering setting up shop here in Willow Creek now that Mrs. Finch is gone. She's quite talented. Indeed, Mrs. Harrington looked Juliana up and down with new consideration. As it happens, my daughter Victoria is to be married this autumn, and we've been at our wits' end about her wedding gown. Perhaps you might call at our home tomorrow to discuss the possibility of creating something suitable. Juliana was momentarily speechless. A wedding gown commission would provide enough income for her to establish herself independently if she decided to stay in Willow Creek. That's very kind, Mrs. Harrington, she finally managed. I would be delighted to discuss it with you and your daughter. Excellent. Shall we say 2 o'clock? The Harrington estate is just north of town. Anyone can direct you. Without waiting for confirmation, Mrs. Harrington paid for her buttons and swept out of the store with the confidence of a woman accustomed to having her wishes fulfilled without question. As soon as the door closed behind her, Mrs. Atwell turned to Juliana with newfound respect. Well, if you're to be dressing the Harrington girl, you'll need a proper workspace. Old Mrs. Finch's shop is still vacant, you know. Her nephew inherited it but has no use for it. I could speak to him if you're interested. Juliana's head was spinning. In less than 10 minutes, she had potentially acquired a prestigious client and the offer of a shop. It seemed too good to be true, and in her experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. Thank you, Mrs. Atwell, that's very thoughtful, but I haven't yet decided whether I'll be staying in Willow Creek. Martha squeezed her arm gently. No need to decide everything today. Now, about that green silk thread, by the time Blake returned to meet them, Mrs. Atwell had not only found the perfect thread to match Juliana's dress, but had also insisted on showing her every bolt of fabric in the store, along with the selection of notions, ribbons, and lace that Mrs. Finch had special ordered before her death. Looks like you ladies had a productive visit, Blake observed, noting the packages Martha carried. You have no idea, Martha replied with a laugh. Your friend here has been invited to the Harrington estate tomorrow to discuss making Victoria's wedding gown. Blake's eyebrows shot up. The Harringtons? Well now, that's something. As they drove back to the ranch, Juliana told Blake about the unexpected encounter with Mrs. Harrington and Mrs. Atwell's suggestion about Mrs. Finch's shop. Seems like Willow Creek's ready to welcome you with open arms, Blake remarked, his expression unreadable. It's happening rather fast, Juliana admitted. I'm not sure what to think. You don't have to decide anything right away, Blake assured her. You've got a place with us for as long as you need. The sincerity in his voice made Juliana's heart flutter strangely. She had known Blake Hawkins for barely a day, yet she felt safer with him than she had with anyone in years. Back at the ranch, Juliana spent the afternoon carefully mending her mother's dress. The work was painstaking but therapeutic. As her needle moved in and out of the delicate fabric, creating nearly invisible stitches that gradually closed the jagged tear, she found herself thinking about Blake, his kindness, his quiet strength, and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. It's looking good, Martha commented, pausing by the chair where Juliana worked. You can hardly see where it was torn. Juliana held up the dress, examining her handiwork. It will never be perfect again, but it's whole. Martha nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes that's the best we can hope for. Being whole again, even with the scars. That evening after dinner, Blake surprised Juliana by asking if she'd like to see the rest of the ranch. There's still daylight left, he said, and there's a spot I thought you might appreciate, being from back east and all. Curious, Juliana agreed, and soon they were walking side by side across the golden prairie. Blake led her past the main pastures where his small herd of cattle grazed, beyond the barn and corrals, to a gentle rise overlooking a bend in the creek. There, nestled against the hillside, was a grove of cottonwood trees surrounding a small natural pool where the creek widened and deepened. Wildflowers dotted the grass, and the evening light filtered through the leaves, creating a dappled pattern on the ground. Oh, Juliana breathed, enchanted by the unexpected beauty. It's lovely. Blake smiled, pleased by her reaction. Thought you might like it. When I first came out here after the war, this spot is what made me decide to buy this land. Reminded me that there were still peaceful places in the world. Juliana understood completely. After all she'd been through, the tranquility of this hidden grove felt like a balm to her soul. They sat on a fallen log near the water's edge, listening to the gentle gurgle of the creek and the rustling of leaves overhead. Thank you for bringing me here, Juliana said softly, and for everything else. You and Martha have been kinder than I deserve. Blake shook his head. Don't say that. Everyone deserves kindness, especially those who have had too little of it. His words touched her deeply, and before she could think better of it, Juliana found herself opening up about her past. After my parents died, I became a governess for a wealthy family in Boston. The father, she swallowed hard, the memory still painful after all this time. He made advances. When I refused him, he accused me of trying to seduce him. His wife believed him, of course. I was dismissed without references, my reputation in tatters. Blake's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. I came west because I had nowhere else to go. I found work as a seamstress in one town after another, but somehow the rumors always caught up with me. In Riverspend, it was the mayor's wife who decided I was after her husband. I wasn't, of course, but once she turned the town against me. Juliana trailed off, then added quietly, so I ran. Again. Blake was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the rippling water of the creek. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. People can be cruel, especially to those they see as outsiders or threats, but not everyone is like that, Juliana. There are good folks in Willow Creek, and Martha and we know what it's like to be judged unfairly. Juliana looked at him curiously. What do you mean? Blake sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. After the war, things were hard. I did some things I'm not proud of to survive, rode with some rough men for a while. He paused, then added, I never broke the law, but I came close a few times. When I finally earned enough to buy this place, I was determined to make a fresh start, be the kind of man my pa would have been proud of. And have you made a fresh start, I mean? Blake nodded slowly. I believe I have. It wasn't easy, and there are still folks who look at me sideways because of my past associations. But most people in Willow Creek have accepted me for who I am now, not who I was then. His story gave Juliana hope. If Blake could build a new life here, perhaps she could too. About tomorrow, she said. Would you mind accompanying me to the Harrington estate? I know it's presumptuous to ask, but I'd feel better having someone I trust with me. The words "someone I trust" slipped out before she could consider them, but Juliana realized they were true. Somehow, in the span of just over a day, she had come to trust Blake Hawkins. I'd be honored, Blake replied, a smile warming his features. Though I should warn you, Henry Harrington and I have had our differences in the past. His wife may be eager for your services, but he might not be so welcoming when he sees me riding with you. All the more reason to have you there, Juliana said decisively. I'd rather know immediately if this opportunity has strings attached, Blake chuckled. You're a brave woman, Juliana O'Sullivan. As they walked back to the ranch house in the gathering twilight, their hands brushed accidentally. Juliana felt a spark of warmth at the contact, and though neither of them acknowledged it, she noticed that Blake walked a little closer to her afterward. That night, lying in Martha's bed, Juliana found herself thinking about Blake's story, about second chances and fresh starts. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't constantly running, a future where she had a home, a business of her own, and perhaps even someone to share it with. It was a dangerous thought, one that left her vulnerable to disappointment. But as Juliana drifted off to sleep, she couldn't quite suppress the small flicker of hope that had ignited in her heart. The Harrington estate lived up to its name, a grand two-story house with a wraparound porch, set on several acres of manicured grounds north of Willow Creek. As Blake helped Juliana down from his horse, she couldn't help but feel intimidated by the display of wealth. Remember, Blake said quietly, you're doing them a favor, not the other way around. They need your skills. His words bolstered her confidence. Smoothing down the borrowed dress from Martha, which had been hastily altered to better fit her slender frame, Juliana took a deep breath and approached the front door with Blake at her side. A maid in a crisp uniform answered their knock, and upon hearing Juliana's name, immediately ushered them into an elegantly appointed parlor where Mrs. Harrington and a young woman who could only be Victoria awaited. Victoria Harrington was perhaps 19 or 20, with her mother's blonde hair and a pretty if somewhat petulant face. She sat straight-backed on a brocade settee, her expression a mixture of boredom and curiosity. "Miss O'Sullivan, how prompt you are, Mrs." Harrington greeted her, then noticed Blake standing slightly behind Juliana. Her welcoming smile faltered. "Mr. Hawkins, I wasn't expecting you." "Mr. Hawkins was kind enough to escort me," Juliana explained smoothly. "I'm not yet familiar with the area." Before Mrs. Harrington could respond, the parlor door opened again, and a distinguished-looking man with silver at his temples entered. Henry Harrington's gaze immediately locked onto Blake, his expression hardening. "Hawkins, what brings you to my home?" The tension in the room thickened perceptibly. Blake, however, remained relaxed, tipping his hat respectfully. "Mr. Harrington, just escorting Miss O'Sullivan at her request. I understand your daughter is in need of a skilled seamstress for her wedding gown, Mr." Harrington's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing further, turning instead to Juliana. "So you're the seamstress Margaret has been talking about. You have experience with wedding attire." "Yes, sir," Juliana replied with more confidence than she felt. "I apprenticed with Madame Lefevre in Boston, who specialized in bridal fashions for society ladies." The name dropping had its intended effect. Mrs. Harrington's eyes widened with recognition. "Madame Lefevre? Why, she made my own wedding gown 25 years ago." "I had no idea you trained with someone so distinguished." The atmosphere in the room shifted as Juliana was suddenly viewed not merely as a convenient local seamstress, but as a genuine artisan with prestigious credentials. Victoria, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward with new interest. "Can you make something like the gowns in Godey's Lady's Book? I want something modern, not like the provincial styles everyone wears around here." "Of course," Juliana assured her. "I've brought some sketches, if you'd like to see them." From a portfolio Martha had found for her, Juliana extracted several drawings she had hastily created the previous evening. As Victoria and her mother exclaimed over the designs, Juliana was acutely aware of Blake and Mr. Harrington engaged in some sort of silent standoff across the room. "This one," Victoria declared finally, pointing to a design featuring a fashionable bustle and elaborate lace overlay. "But I want the neckline lower and more lace at the sleeves." Mrs. Harrington nodded approvingly. "Excellent choice, darling. Miss O'Sullivan, when could you begin?" "I would need to take proper measurements," Juliana explained, "and discuss fabric options. And of course, I would need a workspace." "I understand Mrs. Finch's old shop is available," Mrs. Harrington said. "We could certainly arrange for you to use it." "Henry, wouldn't Mr. Peterson be amenable to a short-term lease until Miss O'Sullivan decides whether to remain in Willow Creek permanently?" Mr. Harrington, still eyeing Blake suspiciously, seemed to come to a decision. "I suppose it could be arranged. Peterson owes me a favor or two, but I would need assurances that Miss O'Sullivan intends to fulfill her commitment to Victoria's gown, regardless of her future plans." "Of course," Juliana agreed quickly. "Victoria's gown would be my priority. And your association with Hawkins here, Mr. Harrington asked pointedly. "I hope that won't be a distraction from your work." Blake tensed beside her, but Juliana placed a calming hand on his arm. "Mr. Hawkins and his sister have graciously offered me hospitality while I establish myself in Willow Creek. I assure you my professional commitments always come first." Mrs. Harrington glanced between Juliana and Blake, a knowing look in her eyes. "Well, I for one am delighted to have found someone with your talents, Miss O'Sullivan. When could you begin Victoria's fittings?" "As soon as I have a workspace prepared," Juliana replied. "Perhaps by the end of the week." And so it was arranged. Mr. Harrington would speak to Mr. Peterson about the shop. Victoria would come for her first fitting on Friday, and Juliana would remain at the Hawkins ranch until alternative accommodations could be found. As they rode away from the Harrington estate, Juliana's mind was awhirl with plans and possibilities. "I can't believe it happened so quickly," she said. "Just 3 days ago I was fleeing Riverspend with nothing but the clothes on my back." Blake smiled at her amazement. Things can change fast out here. That's both the blessing and the curse of the frontier. I noticed the tension between you and Mr. Harrington, Juliana ventured. You mentioned you had differences, but it seemed more personal than that. Blake was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Harrington's bank foreclosed on several small ranches during a drought 2 years back. Good folks who just needed a little more time to get back on their feet. I spoke up about it, tried to organize the other ranchers to help. Harrington didn't appreciate the interference. That was brave of you, Juliana said softly. Blake shrugged. Not brave enough. I couldn't save most of those ranches, but Harrington's kept his distance from me since then, which suits me fine. As they approached the creek where Blake had found her just days before, Juliana asked him to stop. Dismounting, she walked to the spot where she had sat crying over her torn dress. It felt like a lifetime ago. Something wrong? Blake asked, joining her by the water's edge. Juliana shook her head. Just thinking about how much has changed if you hadn't found me here. But I did, Blake said simply, and I'm mighty glad of it. The way he looked at her then, with warmth and something deeper that she wasn't quite ready to name, made Juliana's heart skip a beat. So am I, she admitted, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps her luck had finally changed. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. True to his word, Mr. Harrington arranged for Juliana to lease Mrs. Finch's former shop, a charming storefront on Willow Creek's main street with living quarters above. Blake and Martha helped her clean and prepare the space, moving in the sewing equipment that had been left behind and supplementing it with items Martha had stored away. Mrs. Atwell, eager to support the town's new seamstress, provided fabric samples and notions on credit until Juliana could establish herself. Word of Victoria Harrington's wedding gown commission spread quickly, and soon other ladies of Willow Creek were finding reasons to drop by the shop, ostensibly to welcome Juliana, but clearly also to assess her skills and perhaps secure her services for themselves. Through it all, Blake was a steady presence, helping with the heavier work of setting up the shop, offering quiet encouragement when Juliana's confidence wavered, and generally making himself indispensable in ways that had nothing to do with physical labor and everything to do with emotional support. By Friday, the shop was ready for Victoria's first fitting. Juliana had prepared several fabric samples and refined her design based on their initial conversation. As the appointed hour approached, she found herself nervously adjusting and readjusting the display of ribbons in the front window. "It's going to be fine," Blake assured her, having stopped by on his way to the feed store. "You know your craft better than anyone in this town. Just trust in that." Juliana smiled gratefully. "Thank you for everything, Blake. I don't know how I would have managed all this without you and Martha." "You'd have managed," he said with certainty. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, but I'm glad we could help." There was something in his eyes as he looked at her in admiration that went beyond mere friendship. Before either of them could say more, however, the shop door opened, announcing Victoria Harrington's arrival with her mother in tow. Blake tipped his hat to the ladies and excused himself, promising to return later to escort Juliana back to the ranch, where she was still staying until the living quarters above the shop could be properly arranged. The fitting went better than Juliana had dared hope. Victoria, despite her initially haughty demeanor, proved to have a good eye for fashion and reasonable expectations about what could be achieved. By the time they finished discussing fabrics and design details, Juliana had a clear vision for the gown and Victoria seemed genuinely excited about the result, as Mrs. Harrington settled the financial arrangements, a generous advance that would cover Juliana's expenses for the next month. She mentioned casually, "I understand you're still staying with the Hawkins." "Yes, just until I can properly set up the rooms upstairs," Juliana confirmed, wondering at the woman's tone. Mrs. Harrington pursed her lips. "You should be aware, my dear, that while Blake Hawkins is respected as a rancher, his reputation with young ladies is somewhat problematic." Several broken hearts in his wake, I believe. Juliana felt a surge of protective indignation. Mr. Hawkins has been nothing but a perfect gentleman to me. Oh, I'm sure he has, Mrs. Harrington replied with a knowing smile. He's quite charming. Just a friendly word of caution from someone who knows the history of this town. A young woman in your position, establishing a business, cannot be too careful about her associations. Before Juliana could formulate a response that wouldn't jeopardize her most important client, Victoria interrupted with questions about lace patterns, effectively ending the uncomfortable conversation. After the Harringtons departed, Juliana found herself troubled by Mrs. Harrington's warning. Could Blake really have left a trail of broken hearts in Willow Creek? It didn't align with the man she had come to know, the kind, honorable rancher who had taken in a distressed stranger without hesitation. But then, she had been deceived by men before. When Blake returned later that afternoon, Juliana found herself studying him more carefully, looking for signs of the cad Mrs. Harrington had implied he might be. All she saw was the same steady, reliable man who had been her anchor these past few days. Everything go all right with Victoria? He asked as they walked back toward the ranch, the setting sun casting long shadows ahead of them. Yes, very well, Juliana replied, then, unable to contain her curiosity, added, Mrs. Harrington mentioned something odd, though. She seemed to think you have a reputation with the young ladies of Willow Creek. Blake stopped walking, his expression a mixture of surprise and resignation. Did she now? Is it true? Juliana asked directly. Blake sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. Not the way she likely presented it. There was a young lady, Sarah Peterson, Mr. Peterson's daughter. We courted for a time last year. It was serious enough that folks expected an engagement announcement. What happened? She received an offer to teach at a girls' school in St. Louis. It was her dream, something she'd been working toward for years. I couldn't ask her to give that up to be a rancher's wife in Willow Creek. Juliana studied his face, seeing only honesty there. So you ended it? We agreed it was for the best. She left for St. Louis and I stayed here. Blake replaced his hat, his expression thoughtful. Mrs. Harrington and the other town gossips decided I'd broken Sarah's heart and driven her away. Made for a better story than the truth, I suppose. Relief washed over Juliana, followed immediately by guilt for having doubted him. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked. No, you had every right to ask, Blake said firmly. You're building a life here and you need to know who you can trust. I hope I'm one of those people, Juliana. The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. You are, she assured him. More than anyone I've known in a very long time. As they continued walking, their hands brushed against each other, just as they had that evening by the creek. This time, however, Blake gently caught her fingers with his own. Juliana's heart raced at the contact, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed her hand to remain in his, warm and secure, for the rest of the walk back to the ranch. That evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Martha excused herself early, claiming fatigue from the day's work, but throwing a knowing glance at her brother that Juliana pretended not to notice. Alone with Blake in the soft glow of the lantern light, Juliana felt a curious mixture of nervousness and contentment. They rocked gently in their chairs, the familiar creak of the wooden slats a soothing counterpoint to the chorus of night insects. I'll be moving into the rooms above the shop tomorrow, Juliana said, breaking the comfortable silence. Mrs. Atwell has offered to help me arrange the furniture. Blake nodded, though she thought she detected a flicker of disappointment in his expression. It's a good space. You'll be comfortable there. I hope so. Juliana hesitated, then added softly, I'll miss this, though. The evenings on the porch, your company. Blake turned to look at her, the lantern light catching the gold flecks in his brown eyes. You know you're always welcome here, Juliana. Anytime. For dinner or just to sit a spell. Thank you, she smiled, touched by his sincerity. And you're welcome at the shop, of course, anytime you're in town. I might find myself in town more often now, Blake admitted with a slight smile. Seems I've developed an interest in dressmaking." Juliana laughed. "Have you really?" "Well, perhaps not dressmaking specifically," Blake clarified, his voice growing softer. "More an interest in the dressmaker." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Juliana felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away from his steady gaze. "Blake," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say but feeling that something needed to be said. "You don't have to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I know it's fast. You've barely had time to catch your breath since coming to Willow Creek. I wanted you to know how I feel." Juliana nodded, appreciating his understanding. "It is fast," she agreed, "and my past experiences make me cautious, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel something too." Blake's smile was worth any risk of vulnerability. "Then we'll take it slow. Get to know each other properly. No expectations beyond that." As they continued to rock side by side under the star-filled Kansas sky, Juliana felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Whatever might develop between them, she knew that in Blake Hawkins, she had found someone truly worth trusting and perhaps, in time, worth loving. The Harvest Festival arrived on a perfect autumn day, crisp and clear, with just enough breeze to stir the bunting that decorated Willow Creek's Main Street. In the 3 weeks since Juliana had established herself in town, she had completed not only significant progress on Victoria's wedding gown, but also several other commissions from the ladies of Willow Creek. Word of her skill had spread even to neighboring towns, and Juliana found herself with more work than she had expected at this early stage. As promised, Blake had found numerous reasons to visit town, stopping by the shop to check on her progress, bring her lunch when she was too busy to break for a meal, or simply to sit and talk as she worked. Their relationship had developed gradually, built on shared conversations, mutual respect, and an ever-deepening affection that neither rushed to define but both clearly cherished. For the festival, Juliana had worn her mother's emerald dress, now perfectly mended and altered slightly to better suit current fashions. As she walked beside Blake through the festival grounds, she couldn't help but marvel at how different her life was now compared to that desperate day by the creek. "Penny for your thoughts," Blake said, noticing her pensive expression. Juliana smiled up at him. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in such a short time. 1 month ago I was running for my life, now I have a shop, clients, friends." "And?" Blake prompted, his eyes twinkling. "And you," Juliana finished softly, "the most unexpected and welcome change of all." Blake's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "I feel the same way. Never thought finding a crying woman with a torn dress would lead to this." The memory of their first meeting, once painful, now brought a smile to Juliana's face. "You were very gallant, you know. You look beautiful anyway." "I thought you were just being kind." "I was being honest," Blake corrected her. "Still am. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever known, Juliana O'Sullivan, torn dress or not." His words warmed her heart, and Juliana found herself leaning closer to him as they strolled past the various festival attractions, games for the children, displays of preserves and baked goods, competitions for the finest livestock and crops. They paused to watch a group of fiddlers playing lively tunes while couples danced on a wooden platform constructed specifically for the occasion. Martha was among them, being twirled enthusiastically by the town's young blacksmith, her face flushed with happiness. "Your sister seems to be enjoying herself," Juliana observed with a smile. Blake nodded, watching Martha with obvious affection. "About time. She spent too many years taking care of me, deserves some happiness of her own." "And what about you?" Juliana asked softly. "What do you deserve, Blake Hawkins?" Blake turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "More than I ever thought possible a month ago," he said quietly, "but only if you're willing to give it." Before Juliana could respond, they were interrupted by Mrs. Harrington, resplendent in a plum-colored day dress that Juliana recognized as one of her own creations. "Miss O'Sullivan, Mr. Hawkins." Mrs. Harrington greeted them with a nod. "I've been looking for you. Victoria has been showing all her friends the sketches for her wedding gown, and Mrs. Abernathy's daughter is positively green with envy. She's hoping you might create something equally magnificent for her own wedding next spring. I'd be happy to discuss it with her, Juliana replied politely. Mrs. Harrington beamed. Excellent. I knew you'd be an asset to our little community. And speaking of community, her gaze drifted meaningfully to where Blake and Juliana's hands were still joined. I see you've decided to ignore my friendly advice about certain associations. Blake stiffened beside her, but Juliana squeezed his hand reassuringly. Mrs. Harrington, I appreciate your concern, but I believe I'm quite capable of determining which associations are beneficial to me, both personally and professionally. Mrs. Harrington's eyebrows rose at Juliana's polite but firm rebuke. After a moment, her expression softened into something almost approving. Well said, my dear. Perhaps I was hasty in my assessment. Mr. Hawkins has certainly been a more constant presence in town lately, and I understand his ranch is thriving under his management. That speaks well of his character. It was as close to an apology as the proud woman was likely to offer. Juliana accepted it with a gracious nod, and Mrs. Harrington moved on to speak with other festival-goers. That was diplomatic, Blake commented when they were alone again. Juliana smiled. I've learned that in small towns, it's better to gently correct misunderstandings than to create enemies, especially when the misunderstanding involves someone I care about. The evening's entertainment culminated in a dance in the town hall, decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty. Blake, who had claimed to have 2 left feet, surprised Juliana by leading her confidently through several dances. You've been holding out on me, Mr. Hawkins, she teased as they twirled among the other couples. You dance quite well for a man who supposedly can't tell his left foot from his right. Blake grinned. Martha's been giving me lessons, said I'd embarrass her at the festival if I didn't learn proper steps. Remind me to thank her, Juliana said, enjoying the secure feeling of being in his arms even in this most public of settings. As the evening wore on, Blake suggested they step outside for some fresh air. The night was cool but not uncomfortable, the stars brilliant in the clear sky above. They walked a short distance from the town hall, finding a quiet spot beneath an old oak tree. Juliana, Blake began, his voice serious. These past weeks have been the happiest I can remember. I know we agreed to take things slow, and if you need more time, I understand. But I want you to know that my feelings for you are serious, more than serious. Juliana's heart raced at his words. Mine are too, Blake. I've never felt this way about anyone before. Blake took both her hands in his. When I found you by that creek, crying over your torn dress, I had no idea I was meeting the woman I'd fall in love with. But that's what's happened, Juliana. I've fallen in love with you. The simple, heartfelt declaration brought tears to Juliana's eyes. I love you too, Blake. I think I have almost from the beginning, though I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself. Blake's smile was radiant in the moonlight. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, Juliana felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world, as if all the running and fear and uncertainty of her past had been leading her to this moment, this man, this chance at happiness. I don't want to rush you, Blake said softly. But I need you to know that I'm in this for keeps, Juliana. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I want to build a life with you. I'm ready now, Juliana whispered, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. I don't need more time to know what my heart already does. Blake's eyes widened. Are you saying, I'm saying that I love you, Blake Hawkins, and if you were to ask me a certain question, my answer would be yes. For a moment, Blake seemed stunned. Then, with a reverence that brought fresh tears to Juliana's eyes, he knelt before her on one knee. I don't have a ring, he apologized. I didn't plan this tonight. I don't need a ring, Juliana assured him. Just you. Blake took a deep breath. Juliana O'Sullivan, I love you with all my heart. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Juliana answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." As Blake rose and pulled her into his arms for another kiss, deeper and more passionate than the first, Juliana felt the last pieces of her broken past finally healing. She had come to Kansas running from pain and rejection, only to find love and acceptance in the most unexpected place with a kind-hearted cowboy who had seen beauty in her, even at her lowest moment. The news of Blake and Juliana's engagement spread quickly through Willow Creek, met with general approval and only a few raised eyebrows at the speed of their courtship. Martha was ecstatic, embracing Juliana as the sister she'd always wanted and immediately beginning plans for the wedding. "Nothing too elaborate," Juliana insisted as the three of them discussed the arrangements over dinner at the ranch. "Something simple with just our closest friends." "And soon," Blake added, his eyes never leaving Juliana's face. "I don't see any reason to wait until spring." Martha laughed at her brother's eagerness. "At least wait until after Victoria Harrington's wedding in November. Juliana needs to finish that gown and the whole town will be at that celebration. It would be poor form to upstage the banker's daughter." Blake conceded the point, and they settled on a December wedding, to be held in the small church in Willow Creek with a celebration afterward at the ranch. The timing would allow Juliana to complete her existing commissions while preparing for their life together. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. Juliana divided her time between her shop, where Victoria's wedding gown was taking final shape, and the ranch, where she and Blake began making plans for their future. They decided that Juliana would maintain her shop in town, at least for now, but would live at the ranch as Blake's wife. The arrangement would allow her to continue the work she loved while building a life with the man she loved. As November arrived, bringing with it the first hint of winter's chill, Juliana found herself spending more time at the ranch than in town. Blake had begun renovations on the house, adding a larger bedroom and expanding the parlor to make it more comfortable for entertaining. Juliana contributed her own touches, new curtains she had sewn herself, quilts for the beds, and small decorative items that transformed the bachelor's quarters into a true home. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace after dinner, Blake surprised Juliana with a small velvet box. "I know you said you didn't need a ring," he began somewhat nervously, "but I wanted you to have one anyway." Inside the box was a delicate gold band set with a small but perfect emerald, surrounded by tiny pearls. Juliana gasped at its beauty. "Blake, it's exquisite." "But how when? I ordered it from Kansas City the day after the festival," he admitted. "It arrived yesterday. I chose the emerald because it reminded me of your dress, the one you were wearing when we first met, and again when you agreed to be my wife." Tears of happiness filled Juliana's eyes as Blake slipped the ring onto her finger. "It's perfect," she whispered, "just like everything else about our story." Victoria Harrington's wedding in mid-November was the social event of the season. The entire town turned out to see the banker's daughter wed to the son of a prominent cattle baron from Topeka, but it was Juliana's creation, a masterpiece of ivory silk, delicate lace, and intricate beadwork that drew the most admiring comments. "You've outdone yourself, Miss O'Sullivan, Mrs. Harrington declared at the reception, where Juliana stood with Blake, receiving congratulations not only for her work on the gown but also for her upcoming marriage. "Victoria looks absolutely radiant." Indeed, the young bride was glowing with happiness, the gown enhancing her natural beauty in exactly the way Juliana had envisioned. Watching Victoria dance with her new husband, Juliana felt a deep sense of professional satisfaction. "You're very talented," Blake murmured in her ear. "The most skilled seamstress I've ever known," Juliana laughed softly. "High praise from a man who probably never noticed a dress in his life before meeting me." "That's not true," Blake protested with mock indignation. "I noticed yours right away. Especially the tear that gave me an excuse to speak to you." Best thing that ever happened to that dress, Juliana said, leaning into him slightly. And to me. As November gave way to December, preparations for their own wedding intensified. Juliana created a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored silk for herself, while Blake ordered a new suit from Kansas City. Martha organized the decoration of the church and planned the menu for the celebration at the ranch. On the morning of the wedding, Juliana awoke in her rooms above the shop, where she had spent her last night as a single woman. Martha arrived early to help her dress and arrange her hair, bringing with her a bouquet of winter greenery and dried flowers from the ranch's greenhouse. "Blake's as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs," Martha reported with a laugh as she pinned Juliana's auburn curls into an elegant arrangement. "Never seen my brother so fidgety." Juliana smiled at her soon-to-be sister-in-law in the mirror. "I'm a bit nervous myself." "Is that strange when I'm so certain this is right?" Martha shook her head. "Not strange at all. It's a big step joining your life to someone else's, but if ever two people were meant to find each other, it's you and Blake." When Juliana was finally ready, dressed in her cream silk gown with her mother's lace shawl draped around her shoulders, Martha stepped back to admire the effect. "You're beautiful," she said softly. "Blake is going to lose his breath when he sees you." The small church was filled with friends and neighbors when Juliana arrived. Even the Harringtons had come, their presence a tacit approval of the match that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. As the simple ceremony began, and Juliana walked down the aisle alone, having no family to give her away, her eyes found Blake waiting for her at the altar. The love and wonder in his expression as he watched her approach made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The minister's words washed over her as she stood beside Blake, their hands joined, their hearts already united. When it came time for their vows, Blake's voice was steady and sure. "Juliana, when I found you that day by the creek, I told you that you looked beautiful even with a torn dress. What I didn't say then, but know now with absolute certainty, is that you are the most beautiful soul I have ever encountered. Your strength, your kindness, your determination, they humble and inspire me every day. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. Whatever challenges we face, we will face them together. Whatever joys come our way, we will share them, multiplying their sweetness. This is my solemn vow to you." Tears blurred Juliana's vision as she responded with her own promises. "Blake, you saw me at my lowest moment and offered kindness without judgment. You gave me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. But more than that, you gave me hope when I had none left. In you, I have found not just a partner, but a home, not a place, but a person with whom I can truly be myself. I promise to love you, support you, and stand beside you through whatever life brings us. To laugh with you in joy and comfort you in sorrow, to build a life of meaning and purpose together. This is my promise, my vow, my heart's deepest desire." With the exchange of rings and the minister's blessing, they were pronounced husband and wife. Blake's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of the life they would share. The celebration at the ranch afterward was joyful and intimate, with good food, music, and dancing that continued well into the evening. As the last guests departed and Juliana found herself alone with her new husband in their home, she felt a sense of rightness that transcended mere happiness. "Mrs. Hawkins," Blake said softly, drawing her into his arms, "has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" "The nicest," Juliana agreed, resting her head against his chest, "though I might keep O'Sullivan for my business. Juliana O'Sullivan, dressmaker, has a certain professional sound to it," Blake chuckled. "Whatever you prefer, my love, as long as you're my wife in all the ways that matter." Later that night, as they lay in each other's arms in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Juliana reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate young woman fleeing yet another town in disgrace to the beloved wife of a respected rancher and a successful businesswoman in her own right, it was a transformation she could never have imagined that day by the creek. What are you thinking about?" Blake asked sleepily, his arms tightening around her. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best," Juliana replied, snuggling closer to him. "If my dress hadn't torn that day, if you hadn't found me crying." "I'd have found you some other way," Blake said with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Juliana. We were meant to be." As she drifted off to sleep in the arms of the man she loved, Juliana knew he was right. Their meeting might have seemed like chance, but their love had been a choice, a conscious decision to trust, to hope, to believe in the possibility of happiness after pain. And in that choice, they had both found the second chance they deserved. 5 years later, Juliana stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching as Blake taught their 4-year-old son James to ride his pony in the fenced corral nearby. Their 2-year-old daughter Emma sat on a quilt at Juliana's feet, carefully arranging colored wooden blocks in patterns that made sense only to her. The ranch had prospered under Blake's management, expanding to include more cattle and several fine horses that he bred and trained. Juliana's dressmaking business had grown as well, with clients now coming from as far as Topeka and Kansas City for her designs. She had taken on 2 apprentices to help with the workload, allowing her to spend more time at the ranch with her family while still pursuing the craft she loved. Martha had married the blacksmith 2 years earlier and lived in town, though she visited the ranch often, especially since the birth of her own son 6 months ago. The siblings remained close, their family circle now expanded to include spouses and children. Life wasn't perfect. There had been challenges along the way, including a difficult drought, a fire in the barn that had required rebuilding, and a complicated pregnancy with Emma that had frightened them both. But through it all, Blake and Juliana's partnership had remained strong, each challenge faced together and ultimately overcome. As James successfully completed a circle around the corral on his pony, Blake's proud whoop made Juliana smile. He caught her watching and waved, his face lighting up with the same love that had been there from the beginning. Juliana waved back, her heart full. Her emerald green dress, carefully preserved and occasionally worn for special occasions, hung in their bedroom wardrobe, a reminder of where their story had begun. The tear, mended with such care, was barely visible now, just as the wounds of her past had healed with time and love. Sometimes, in quiet moments like this, Juliana marveled at how a single act of kindness, a stranger stopping to help a crying woman with a torn dress, had changed the entire course of her life. Blake had been right that day on the creek bank and every day since. She was beautiful anyway, tears, torn dress, and all. And in his eyes, in the life they had built together, in the family they had created, she had found a beauty and happiness beyond anything she could have imagined. As the sun began to set over the Kansas prairie, casting the same golden light that had illuminated their first meeting, Blake lifted James from the pony and walked toward the porch, their son perched proudly on his shoulders. "Mama, did you see me?" James called excitedly. "I rode all by myself." "I saw, sweetheart," Juliana confirmed. "You were wonderful." Blake set James down beside Emma on the quilt and joined Juliana on the porch swing, his arm automatically going around her shoulders as she leaned into him. "Happy?" he asked softly, a question he still posed regularly, as if to reassure himself that the life they had built together was real. Juliana turned her face up to his, smiling into the warm brown eyes that had first looked at her with such kindness, and now held the wisdom of years shared. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "Utterly and completely happy." As Blake's lips met hers in a tender kiss that still held the power to make her heart race, Juliana silently thanked whatever fate, chance, or providence had led him to find her that day by the creek. In that moment of despair, she could never have imagined the joy that awaited her, a joy that had begun with a torn dress and a cowboy's gentle words. "You look beautiful anyway."